It was a stormy Friday evening when Alvin decided to stop by the Mcdonald's on the outskirts of town. He had been driving for hours, and the weather was getting worse by the minute. The rain pounded against the windshield, and the wipers struggled to keep up. Alvin squinted through the downpour, relieved when he finally saw the familiar golden arches glowing in the distance. It was late, and the parking lot was nearly empty, save for a few scattered cars. As Alvin pulled into a spot near the entrance, he noticed how desolate the place seemed. Usually, McDonald's was bustling with people, even at odd hours. Tonight, however, the atmosphere felt different, eerily quiet, almost as if the building itself was holding its breath. He brushed off the feeling, attributing it to the storm, and made his way inside. The interior was brightly lit, a stark contrast to the dark, stormy night outside. The smell of fries and burgers wafted through the air, instantly making Alvin's mouth water. He approached the counter, where a lone employee stood. The young man, with a name tag that read Ethan, greeted Alvin with a forced smile. "Good evening," Ethan said, his voice sounding flat. "What can I get for you?" Alvin quickly placed his order, a Big Mac meal with extra fries and a large soda. As Ethan prepared the meal, Alvin glanced around the restaurant. The place was impeccably clean, almost too clean. There were no other customers, and the usual sounds of frying, grilling, and chatter were absent. The silence was unsettling. Ethan handed Alvin his tray, and Alvin thanked him before finding a seat by the window. He could barely see outside. The rain was coming down in sheets, and occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the parking lot. Alvin unwrapped his burger and took a bite, savoring the familiar taste. But as he ate, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. After a few minutes, Alvin noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. He looked up and saw a man sitting in a booth across the room. The man was dressed in a dark, rain-soaked coat, and his face was obscured by shadows. Alvin hadn't noticed him come in, and it struck him as odd that the man would sit in the darkest corner of the restaurant. Alvin tried to ignore the stranger and focus on his meal, but curiosity got the better of him. He glanced back at the man, who was now staring directly at him. Alvin felt a chill run down his spine. The man's eyes were piercing, almost inhuman, and they seemed to bore into Alvin's soul. Trying to shake off the discomfort, Alvin returned to his food, but he couldn't help stealing glances at the man. Each time, the stranger's gaze remained fixed on him. Alvin's unease grew, and he decided it was time to leave. He quickly finished his meal and stood up, throwing his trash away. As Alvin headed for the door, Ethan called out to him. "Have a good night," he said, but his tone was devoid of warmth. Alvin mumbled a quick thanks and pushed the door open, stepping out into the storm. The rain was relentless, and he hurried to his car, fumbling with his keys. Once inside, he locked the doors and took a deep breath. The encounter had left him rattled, and he just wanted to get home. As Alvin started the car, he glanced in the rearview mirror. To his horror, the man from the restaurant was standing in the parking lot, directly behind his car. His dark coat flapped in the wind, and his eyes glowed eerily in the lightning flashes. Panic surged through Alvin, and he floored the accelerator, tearing out of the parking lot. The drive home was a blur of rain and fear. Alvin couldn't shake the image of the stranger's eyes, and he kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see the man following him. Finally, he pulled into his driveway, relieved to be home. The rain had let up slightly, and he dashed to his front door, eager to put the night behind him. Once inside, Alvin locked the door and leaned against it, trying to calm his racing heart. He took a deep breath and headed to the living room, where he collapsed onto the couch. The house was dark and silent, a stark contrast to the storm outside. He grabbed the remote and turned on the TV, hoping to distract himself from the unsettling events at McDonald's. As the screen flickered to life, Alvin couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He glanced around the room, but everything seemed normal. The storm raged on outside, and the occasional flash of lightning illuminated the living room. He tried to focus on the TV, but his mind kept drifting back to the stranger with the piercing eyes. Alvin decided he needed a shower to wash away the unease. He got up and headed to the bathroom, stripping off his rain-soaked clothes. The hot water felt good against his skin, and he let it cascade over him, trying to relax. But as he stood there, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He finished his shower quickly and wrapped a towel around himself. When he stepped out of the bathroom, he froze. There, in the hallway, was a trail of wet footprints leading to his bedroom. His heart pounded in his chest as he followed the trail, each step feeling heavier than the last. The footprints led to his bedroom door, which was ajar. Alvin pushed it open slowly, peering inside. The room was dark, but he could make out a figure standing by the window. The stranger from Mcdonald's was there, his back turned to Alvin. Fear paralyzed him. How had the man gotten into his house, and why was he here? The stranger slowly turned around, and Alvin's breath caught in his throat. The man's eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and his face was twisted into a sinister grin. "You can't escape," the stranger whispered, his voice a chilling echo. Alvin stumbled backward, his mind racing. He had to get out, had to find help. He turned and bolted down the hallway, his bare feet slipping on the wet floor. He reached the front door and yanked it open, only to be met with the howling storm. He ran into the rain, his heart pounding. The wind whipped at him, and he could barely see through the downpour. But he kept running, fueled by sheer terror. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get away from the stranger. Alvin ran through the streets, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The rain was relentless, and he was quickly drenched to the bone. He glanced over his shoulder, but there was no sign of the stranger. Maybe he had lost him. He reached a small convenience store and burst inside, startling the clerk behind the counter. Alvin was soaked and shivering, his eyes wide with fear. "Please help me," he gasped. "There's someone after me." The clerk, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, quickly came around the counter. "Calm down, son. What happened?" Alvin tried to explain, but his words came out in a jumbled mess. The clerk led him to a chair and handed him a towel. "Take a deep breath," the clerk said gently. "Tell me everything." Alvin recounted the events of the night, the Eerie Mcdonald's, the stranger with the piercing eyes, the wet footprints in his house. The clerk listened patiently, his expression growing more serious with each word. "You say this man followed you home?" the clerk asked. Alvin nodded, his hands trembling. "Yes, but I don't know how he got into my house." The clerk's eyes narrowed. "You're sure you locked the door?" "I did," Alvin insisted. "I checked it twice." The clerk glanced around the empty store, then leaned closer to Alvin. "There's been talk of strange things happening around here lately. People disappearing, odd sightings. You might be dealing with something unnatural." Alvin's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" The clerk hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Some say there's a curse on this town, a dark presence that latches onto people and drives them mad. If this man is part of that, you need to be very careful." A chill ran down Alvin's spine. "What can I do?" The clerk stood up and walked to a shelf, pulling down a small, dusty book. He handed it to Alvin. "This is a book of old protections and rituals. It might help you keep the presence at bay, at least long enough to find a more permanent solution." Alvin took the book, his hands shaking. "Thank you." The clerk nodded. "Stay safe, son, and don't go back to your house tonight. Find somewhere else to stay." Alvin thanked the clerk again and left the store, the storm still raging outside. He found a nearby motel and checked in, grateful for the temporary refuge. Once in his room, he locked the door and pulled the curtains tight, then sat on the bed and opened the book. The pages were filled with strange symbols and incantations. Alvin scanned them, hoping to find something that would help. One page caught his eye. a protection ritual that required a few simple items: salt, a candle, and a mirror. Luckily, the motel room had all three. He quickly set up the ritual, drawing a circle of salt around the bed and placing the candle and mirror at the center. As he lit the candle, he recited the incantation from the book. The air in the room seemed to thicken, and a faint glow surrounded the circle of salt. Alvin sat inside the circle, his heart pounding. He didn't know if the ritual would work, but it was the only thing he had. He stayed awake as long as he could, watching the candle flicker and listening to the storm outside. Eventually, exhaustion overcame him, and he drifted into a fitful sleep. His dreams were filled with images of the stranger, his glowing eyes and sinister grin. Alvin tossed and turned, unable to escape the nightmare. He woke with a start, the candle still burning beside him. The storm had passed, and the room was eerily quiet. Alvin took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He didn't know what the day would bring, but he had to keep moving, keep searching for answers. As he gathered his things, he noticed something on the mirror, the faint outline of a handprint, as if someone had pressed their palm against the glass. A shiver ran down his spine. He quickly packed up and left the motel, determined to find a way to break the curse. Alvin spent the next few days researching the town's history, visiting the library and talking to locals. He learned that the curse dated back to the town's founding, when a group of settlers had angered a powerful spirit. The spirit had vowed to haunt the town and its inhabitants, driving them to madness and despair. With this knowledge, Alvin sought out a local historian who was rumored to know more about the curse. He found the man, an elderly gentleman named Mr. Harrington, living in a small, cluttered house on the edge of town. Mr. Harrington welcomed Alvin inside and listened intently as he recounted his experiences. The old man nodded gravely, then led Alvin to a dusty bookshelf. "I've studied this curse for many years," Mr. Harrington said. "It's a dark and powerful force, but it can be broken." Alvin's heart leapt. How? Mr. Harrington pulled down a thick, leather-bound book and opened it to a page marked with a ribbon. "There is a ritual, but it requires great courage and strength. You must face the spirit head-on and banish it back to the realm from which it came." Alvin's resolve hardened. "I'll do whatever it takes." Mr. Harrington explained the ritual in detail, outlining the steps and the materials needed. Alvin listened carefully, determined to succeed. He gathered the necessary items and prepared himself for the confrontation. The night of the ritual, Alvin returned to his house. The air was thick with anticipation, and a sense of dread hung over the neighborhood. He entered the house cautiously, the shadows seeming to shift and move around him. Alvin set up the ritual in the living room, drawing a large circle on the floor and placing candles at its points. He lit the candles and began the incantation, his voice steady despite his fear. As he chanted, the air grew colder, and a dark presence filled the room. The shadows coalesced into the form of the stranger, his eyes glowing with malevolent light. Alvin's heart pounded, but he stood his ground. "You cannot banish me," the spirit hissed. "I am eternal." Alvin continued the incantation, his voice growing stronger. The candles flickered, and the air seemed to vibrate with energy. The spirit lunged at him, but the circle held, repelling it with a burst of light. With a final powerful chant, Alvin completed the ritual. The spirit screamed in rage, its form dissolving into shadows. The room shook, and the candles flared brightly before going out. Silence fell, and the oppressive presence lifted. Alvin sank to his knees, exhausted but victorious. He had faced the darkness and won. The curse was broken, and the town was free. In the days that followed, Alvin felt a sense of peace return to his life. The stranger's eyes no longer haunted his dreams, and the shadows in his house seemed less menacing. He knew he had faced something truly terrifying, but he had survived and emerged stronger. Alvin never forgot the night at Mcdonald's and the events that followed. It was a reminder of the thin veil between the seen and the unseen, and the courage it took to confront the darkness. He moved on with his life, but the memories of that harrowing experience stayed with him, a testament to his resilience and determination. As the years passed, Alvin occasionally visited the old McDonald's, now just a regular fast food restaurant with no lingering sense of dread. He would sit by the window, enjoying his meal and reflecting on the night that changed his life forever. And though the storm had long since passed, he knew that the courage he found in facing the darkness would stay with him always.